Okay, it's loading. Okay. Hi there, Ecclesia, and welcome to our Enneagram workshop. My name is Danielle, and I'm one of the interns on staff this year. And this week, we are going to be continuing our discussions on the Enneagram and learning more about ourselves and the church as we go through these discussions. Just as a blanket statement to start off with, even if you're not super into the Enneagram, and you maybe don't know much about it, that's totally fine. We're going to break it down as we go. And also, like, we are definitely not trying to be the Enneagram church. We see this as a tool for learning and growing with God, and as a way to try to see how we can better connect with people and be better servants. So this week, we are focusing on the Enneagram 3, which is the achiever. And we're going to break down a little bit more of what that is later. But first, I would like to have my guests introduce themselves. So if each of you could just tell us your name and a little bit about you, that would be awesome. Can we start with Courtney?
Sure. Well, hi, Danielle. Thanks so much for hosting this evening. I'm excited to share a little bit about my experience and also for hear a little bit from Sean and Sarah as well. But my name is Courtney Graham. My husband Ian is actually the pastor of Ecclesia. We've been in New Jersey for, I want to say, 12 or 13 years now. Planted Ecclesia a couple of years ago. We have 4 kids now, which is crazy, 2 girls and 2 boys. And I work in marketing at Princeton Mortgage. So that's a very quick little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you, Courtney. Sarah, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you for having me on the workshop. I'm Sarah Wydell. I've been a part of Ecclesia since its founding, really. My husband Rich and I are close friends of Ian and Courtney's, and we together began to plant the church back in 2018. And I also have 3 little kids, 3 little kids, 2 boys and a little baby girl. And my husband and I have been living in this New Jersey area for about 7 years now. And in that time, I've been working mostly in the business sector. I worked in the energy industry for all of that time, and recently started a new job with an energy software startup company. And I have explored quite a bit about the Enneagram over the past few years, in both personal reflection and also kind of through learning with my husband, who's been very involved in reading about the theories behind the different types as well. So I'm really excited to share a bit tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And last but not least, Sean.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and learn a bit more about how the threeness affects other people. Yeah, so my name is Sean. I'm currently a student at Princeton Seminary. I'm in my 2nd year here. I've been with Ecclesia for a little over a year now, and both my wife Lauren and I serve on the worship team. And before coming to Princeton, I worked in healthcare digital marketing. Maybe it's something in the 3 to be in marketing. I don't know, maybe we can unpack that a bit later. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so excited that each of you are here. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this discussion with me. So last week, if you were watching, Ian, Courtney, and myself kind of unpacked our first experiences with the Enneagram. I mentioned that I first heard about it in college and kind of thought it was some kind of like new Myers-Briggs thing, and didn't really think much of it until I learned more about it. And Courtney mentioned that it's a huge part of her work environment, and just how things go about in her job and how they communicate and talk. So For Sean and Sarah, I would love to hear about your first experiences with the Enneagram. So Sean, do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So I think I probably first heard of it in college. I don't really have like a date or anything, but I do remember like hearing about it, taking a test, reading some stuff online, and be like, oh, this is another cool thing, just like Myers-Briggs or whatever, like another leadership or personal development thing, and then like really didn't think much of it until my church back home. A lot of other people started getting into it, and they kept asking me, like, have you heard of it? I was like, yeah, I know I'm a 3, and like just kind of left it at that. It wasn't until probably the year or so before coming to seminary that I started diving into some of like Richard Rohr's work and some other people like that, and using it as a tool for spiritual development, and not so much for like leadership or like business development, which I'm curious what everyone else thinks. I think you probably use both ways, but I think it's a unique thing about the Enneagram, that it can be a spiritual tool and not just like how do you interact with others.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll be sure to dive into that as well. Sarah, what were your first experiences with the Enneagram? Was it at a church, through work? Like, I'd love to hear about your experience.
Yeah, so I'm having a hard time recalling who exactly told me to recommend it to me initially. It was either Rich or Courtney, or one or the other, and Rich is my husband. And so I took the test. This was probably, I think, also in 2018. Took the online test, and when I read my results, my first reaction after I read through the description of the 3 was, why doesn't everybody think this way? And I like looked at Rich and I was like, but I thought this is how everybody felt about the world. So it was really interesting to learn that there were actually like 8 other types that were not quite like the 3. So it's been fascinating to me ever since, just to keep unpacking the layers of things you can learn about yourself through this methodology.
Yeah, I remember the first weekend that we all kind of found out about it, and I remember so Ian and I, we were over at Sarah and Rich's house, and I just remember we were like sitting on the couches, and we were just like, wait, you think like this and you think like this, and it was all like very revelatory, like, what is going on right now? Except Sarah and I think the same, so of course we're right.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
awesome.
Exactly. We were like, well, we're just, this is how we see the world. This is a great way to live. What's up with you guys?
Yeah, I love that. I love having those connections and being like, oh my gosh, we think the same, or we think really different. I have a friend group of 1s here at Princeton Seminary, and we're always like, yeah, we think exactly the same in some ways. So I love that.
Danielle, do you remember like a year ago when we first met, we like sat down at a lunch table, a bunch of new students meeting each other, and we were talking about the Enneagram, and I was like, I know a lot about the Enneagram. What do you think I am? And you're like, you're probably a 3. If you're going to lead with that, you're probably going to be that guy. And I was like, yeah, that's probably right.
I do remember that, actually. Yeah, very vividly. You had a very 3 energy about you. So I definitely picked up on that. Yeah, so the next question that is probably good to ask for those who maybe don't know the Enneagram as well is, what does being a 3 mean to you? We each kind of talked about how similar numbers can think similar, but each person can kind of, hi.
Evers is stealing the show.
What a cutie. Yeah, so each person kind of has their own definition of what their number is and what it means to them. So I would love to kind of go around and ask, what does it mean to be a 3 to you? Courtney, would you start us off?
Sure. I feel like that's like a very loaded question. I'm nervous to answer this. So what does a 3 mean to me? So kind of my understanding, and I guess maybe how I relate to it the most from what I've read and studied, is that there's definitely for me, a little bit of like always wanting to push for what's next, or like the next best thing. Like just this always like a more kind of mentality a little bit. And I think in terms of some of the things that I really resonate with when I hear about or read about the three is, and these are not necessarily always things that I'm proud of, I guess I'll just say that, but there's a lot of image consciousness when it comes to being a three, and really caring about what other people think of you. And I think that's something that I really relate to, always wanting to try to appear like I'm putting my best foot forward, or doing the best that I can, or that I'm the best at something. So I think those are some of the things for me that kind of stick out, if I'm being very honest. And again, not always the things that I'm like most proud of about myself, but that's a lot of kind of what it means to me, or what I relate to a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. There's always kind of like those like really good things and the shadow side of each personality.
Definitely.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing. Sean, would you kind of like to share, like, what does it mean to be a three to you?
Yeah, I feel similar to Courtney, like very loaded. I feel like as a three, I have to like exhaustively give an account of what being a three is like, but I will do my best to not do that. Yeah, so I think like positively, I think I have like being a three, at least for me, like I have a pretty good ability to fit in anywhere. Like I'm good at like matching like what someone else wants or needs. But on the flip side, I'm really good at matching what people want or need, to the expense of myself, sometimes. I can also be like really hyper competitive. Like I actually don't really play sports anymore because I just get too competitive. It just becomes not fun for me or anyone else involved. Yeah, and I think like a kind of feeling, maybe similar to Courtney's, like what looking for the next best thing. I kind of have a sense of like I only feel like I'm as good as my last accomplishment. Like if the last thing wasn't perfect, then I need to do something else better or more. And nothing is ever perfect, and so I just have a constant drive to keep doing more. Yeah, later we can kind of talk more about that, but it has been to my detriment at some point in my life. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for your vulnerability with that, Sean. And speaking of the competitiveness, right before we started this, Sean's like, okay, so how do I win? He was just joking around though. Sarah, would you like to share about what it means for you to be a three?
Yes, and the thing that comes to mind, the word that comes to mind for me is the idea of being charming. So I often feel when I enter a room, or if I'm in a new situation, meeting new people, I like to like really enter the space and then immediately think through like, how can I become the most appealing to the people in this place? Like, what kind of people are they? What do they like? What do they not like? What's the body language telling me? And like, how do I become like attractive in this scenario? And not necessarily physically attractive, but even just like in the way that in the questions I ask of them, or the things that I share, like thinking through like what will resonate with these people. So charming comes to mind, which again, in a healthy form, is a way of being very friendly, very kind, very outgoing. Those are positive traits in a healthy environment, or when they're exhibited from a healthy person. But the other word that comes to mind when I think of threes is the idea of the chameleon. So that you also want to just be completely adaptive to whatever environment you're in, and what kind of person do I need to be today, or what kind of person do I need to be, not to fit in, but to seem like the version of excellence in this environment, which speaks to, I think, what Courtney and Sean touched on, which is sometimes in my ability to want to be that chameleon and blend in where I am, I'll exhibit behaviors or decide to behave in a way that's not authentic to me or isn't genuinely what I'm feeling in my more reflective. If I'm in a more reflective state, it might not match my inner emotions. It might be kind of a bit of a show put on to be to be seeming a certain way in an environment, which as I become more and more aware of that, I can see where I've done that. And again, where it's had positive implications in my life, but there's times where it's had the effect of disassociating me from myself a little bit, which, we could talk into more depth about, but the Enneagram has helped me to learn about ways I might have done that in the past and kind of disconnected a bit from my inner self.
Thank you so much for all of you who shared. That really gives a good framing definition of the 3 for us. So that's awesome. Thank you so much. Moving on to a little bit more of a deeper topic. You guys kind of touched on how your 3ness affects like your daily lives. And I kind of want to dig deeper into that. So Courtney and Sarah, you're both parents, and all 3 of you are married. So you have these very personal relationships in your lives, and you have jobs, you have things going on. So my next question is, how do you experience your 3ness, both in your relationships and your daily lives? So relationships being with your kids, with your spouse, friends, and then daily life being like work, home, anything in between. So Courtney, would you start us off?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that question. So I guess one thing that I see with my maybe we'll start with my family first. It's such an interesting question. I think there is, again, being like, I think very honest here. There's a lot of when I think about maybe what other people think about my family, like I'll think about it in that way, being very image conscious about it. Living in New Jersey, my husband's a pastor. We've planted a church. We are not necessarily the cultural norm. Even down to like little things like with the kids, like, okay, how are they dressed? Is their hair combed? Like that's very surface level. But like, if I'm being honest, those are things that kind of I care about. To Sean's point earlier about the competitiveness, like, okay, how are they doing in school? How are they, how is everyone acting, behaving? These are things that I feel like I think about. I also think that in those are some maybe unhealthy ways, mentioning there, but maybe in some more healthy ways. I think some of the good things about it are in terms of my family. I guess part of how I'm wired and part of that's being a 3 is I will push myself a lot to do things for them and really care for them, trying to be overly thoughtful for them and really take care of them. So I think kind of, as I was alluding to a little bit earlier about kind of the more, I think mostly that can be, obviously it can get to an unhealthy level as well, but I think there are a lot of positive implications that I can think about for, my kids or for my husband. So I think that those can be some really nice things. And, obviously I mentioned some unhealthy ones as well. So I think that was family. And then Danielle, remind me the other part of the question.
Just like, how do you experience your 3ness in your daily life? So work, home, anything like that.
So when it comes to work, I think that this is a really interesting one for 3s and one that's often kind of tied in pretty closely. And one of the, I would say, characteristics that a lot of 3s are marked with is, they tend to be workaholics. Is kind of a defining characteristics for a lot of 3s, not all. I would say that I um, fall more closely to that than not. So I would say there's a big part of me where I could find maybe my worth or my value in my work and what I do and my quote unquote outputs that I'm feeling at work. So I feel like a lot of times my worth is defined by my outputs at work. Am I doing a good enough job? Do people like what I'm doing? That has the ability to kind of shape or define how I think about myself from time to time. In a positive way, I think that there are a lot of times where, because I really do care and I really do like what I do and I really do enjoy working, it brings me a lot of joy. I think I'm able to produce and do some really great things, you know. So I think that there are definitely there's a healthy aspect to it and an unhealthy aspect to it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Courtney. And I always, I have to say, I always see your girls with the prettiest bows on. And it always looks so adorable. So I don't know how you do it, but you're doing it.
That's my threeness. It's also part of growing up a little bit in Oklahoma in the South, and it's just like you never leave the house without a bow in your hair. So it's just like how you grow up.
Yeah, well,
until quarantine. Then quarantine happens, and it's like all rules are off.
Yeah, but they are adorable.
Thank you.
Let's hop over to Sean. Same questions to you. How do you experience your threeness, maybe in your friendships, maybe your marriage, but also like your daily life with school, with work, anything like that?
Yeah, I laughed because you threw in friendships on that one, and I wasn't anticipating that. My friends back home will roast me quite hard when I'm like being Sean. They're like, Sean, and just like stop being that version of yourself. But Courtney, you also mentioned quarantine, and I don't want to like take the interview away. I would love to hear how quarantine has affected you guys as well as threes. And I'll start with myself on that one. When quarantine hit, I was like, I'm going to do more than like there's no reason for me not to do more. I don't have to commute anymore. I just have to I have as much time in the day, and that obviously has not worked, but that was my immediate reaction to quarantine. I also will echo Courtney's sentiments on being a workaholic. Earlier, I kind of referenced some unhealthy things that have happened. So I've had one time after directing the technical stuff for a church conference back home, I worked, 90, 100 hours a week, multiple weeks. And then it was like, I'm just going to keep going on with my life. And then Lauren and I went on a date to a Mexican restaurant back home. And I remember ordering food and then like waking up on my parents' couch the next day. And I had like essentially passed out. Like I just like didn't really remember what happened. And Lauren had to like carry me into my parents' house. And it actually happened similarly, not as bad, but at the end of college, I went to a doctor because my hands were shaking a lot. And I was like, I don't know what's happening. And she was like, yeah, you're just really tired and you need to stop doing stuff. So I've tried to take that into my life moving forward, but I do have difficulty just like stopping doing tasks. Because they're important to me. But I also feel like positively on that, there's I have a really strong desire in a work setting and even in a church setting to get the best out of people and the best out of a situation. And so I think threes are really optimistic people at the end of the day. And they can call the best out of people, or at least try to, when they're healthy. That's something I certainly try to lean into in a church or work environment. I think the last bit, as like a student, Willie Jennings' book, After Whiteness, was really impactful to me because he essentially just called out being a three. He didn't use that language whatsoever. He uses the language of whiteness in it, but I took it as meaning a three. and just his experience as a professor watching students try to perform really hard in a classroom. That's how I feel all the time. I feel like I have to like, how is everyone else perceiving me in the class? Have I asked the right question? Does the professor respect my question? And et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I'll leave it there on that one.
Well, Sean, I have to ask, does Lauren still hold it against you that you essentially fell asleep on one of your dates?
I don't think so. I'll have to ask her later. I'll report back to the group.
Okay, sounds good. And yeah, that's a great story. That's a perfect depiction of a 3 just working overtime. Sarah, would you also like to share your experiences?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, starting with like, so you mentioned family, kids, parenting, spouse, and then your relationship with your spouse. So starting with like my relationship with my kids, I think having little kids and being a 3 has been a perfect example. Like it's really made it very clear to me how much I prioritize efficiency and like getting things done. Because one of my greatest struggles as a mother is that I know there is nothing more precious than the time I have with my kids and being really in the moment with them, playing with them, focusing in on them. But one of my greatest struggles frequently, and I've gotten better at it, is I'm usually always trying to do like 2 or 3 things at once. And that doesn't really work with little kids very well. It usually ends up somebody's crying or something spills or something's going wrong. And so I've been fighting it these last few years, but I think I'm finally reconciling that my 3ness was always pushing me to like, by noon I have to have accomplished X number of things. And that doesn't jive with like caring for my little kids in a way that's really intentional. So one of the great practices we've been better about in the last few years is practicing the Sabbath and doing that simple 1 day a week on a weekend where I'm not trying to accomplish all these other things has allowed me to be a much better mother and parent, because it's showing me what it would just be like just to be with my kids and with my husband and just to do the things that are fun and enjoyable and not always checking things off of my list. And so that's been a great blessing, learning through what the purpose is of the Sabbath. And in my relationship with my husband, I would say it's been a good thing that we're both aware of our types, because there's elements of being a 3, and I'm married to an 8. My husband's an Enneagram type 8. And there's elements of our personality types that can lead to competition even with each other, which sounds crazy because you think, how can you be in competition with your spouse, who's this person that you love and adore? And it's true, you do love and adore them, but there's elements of like this feeling of like, if I'm not achieving as much as my spouse, like will he love me the same, or will he see me the same? Will he perceive me as an equal to him? And it's so laughable in many ways when you say it like that, but generally those are questions like Rich and I have talked through honestly together, where I'll say, I'm feeling like competition with you right now because you're doing all these things, and like, am I doing all the things? Am I doing the same things? Are they as valued by society? And he's often said to me in these conversations, which we've had multiple times, so crazy you think this, because I've loved you since I met you, before I even knew all the things you would go on to accomplish. So that wasn't what caused me to fall in love with you. And it sounds so obvious saying it, but it's something that as a 3, I do have to talk it through with him, and just be reminded that I am loved for who I am, purely who I am as a being, not what I've done recently. And so how that also plays out for me in my work life, I guess, is that so I've developed a bit, I think more recently, a more healthy relationship with work, but that very much the path that I've chosen as a career, or the things I've chosen to pursue, I think are representative of my desire to achieve. So the idea that I wanted to work in business, and I wanted to be in a business development role, and I've done work that relates to marketing. So a lot of the things, they're also very external, right? Very much like, how are people perceiving the company or the product, and I get to speak to that. Like, I've gravitated towards roles where I can, which in a way allow me to thrive, but are also very much representative of 3 characteristics. And so in terms of like managing the workaholism, I think, it's for 3's, it's an ongoing struggle, and it can be hard being in business because so much of we do value people in business for what they produce, right? But I mentioned to Sean and Danielle before we joined that I'm starting a new job this week, and part of what I was intentional about with this new job was finding the right team where I felt I would really be valued for myself as who I am as a person, not just what I can do for the team. And of course, that's an important factor, but having the trust that there's a genuine relationship there that's built beyond just my work product I think will help me not only tie my output to success, but also the relationships I'm forming to creating a healthy culture, and one that's based on treating people as individuals and respecting who they are individually as well. So yeah, I think it's a constant balance, ebb and flow of really asking yourself at different phases with all your different relationships, like, how am I showing up? Am I being very Sean, or am I being very Sarah? Or is this more like, hey, Sarah, like, I'm just here,
Yeah. And you mentioned that you're now part of a tech startup, and sometimes with a startup, it can be an uphill battle, but it seems like that would be a very satisfying place to work because there's so much room for growth and achievement, especially for a 3.
Yeah, I think when I was deciding to leave the prior role I was in, I talked with my manager about it, and he said, well, what are you looking to do, Sarah? And I spoke to him for a while, and his response to me was, so you just said you want to lead, and lead. and he was paraphrasing, but basically I had just said in 7 different ways, I just want to be in charge. And so, yeah, I think that's a struggle it's not a struggle, it's also a great thing. Like, I think to Sean's point, 3's are very optimistic. So as leaders, we can be very encouraging. We can make progress. We can help other people realize their own dreams and help them succeed. So there's a lot of positive elements to that too, but it shouldn't be at the expense of your physical well-being in terms of exhaustion or a disassociation from your real feelings.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you for that. And so as we kind of transition in our questions, we definitely want to keep our conversation centered on God and how we can use this information about ourselves to deepen our relationship with Him and better serve others. So my next question would be, how do you think the Enneagram, or like being a 3, can be used to better glorify God and serve people? Just thinking about the strengths that you have been given, or your ability to relate to others, whether it's in a ministry context or just with neighbors, your kids, your spouse. How can we use the Enneagram as a way to be a servant and really glorify God's kingdom as a whole? I know that's kind of a broad question, but feel free to run with it wherever you feel led. Sean, would you start us off this time around?
Yeah, I'll give a crack at it. Yeah, so I would think I would want to start with saying that the Enneagram is a fantastic heuristic device in like spiritually diagnosing yourself and helping others. And if you're close with people who also know it, helping them diagnose you when you're acting or being certain ways, or pointing out when you're unhealthy, or maybe even when you're healthy. So the thing I have probably taken away most in a personal spiritual level is where I move when I'm unhealthy, and that's towards the 9 wing, and that's just not obviously not all 9s are like this, but like just a more apathetic approach to the world. That's how I feel. I'll get very depressed and very just like, what's the point of doing anything? Like there's too many things to do or too many things broken, whatever. And having people close to me pointing out that I'm feeling that way. On the flip side of that, like positively feeling when I know I'm in being healthy, or when I am more healthy, feeling more connected to the group, wherever, if that's in a workplace or a church setting, or even just my friend group, or in relationship with my wife. I just know that when I feel that way, I'm healthier. And so that's like a really quick like diagnostic tool for me. Which helps me kind of calibrate like what it is that I actually need to ask help for from the Holy Spirit. Like if I'm feeling apathetic, like asking for real help to kind of break in there, or if I'm feeling great, asking to continue that on, or like help, just remind me of that when things are not going great. And I think in like relationship with others and glorifying God's kingdom, I think there's this, like when a 3 is really healthy and knows they're part of a team, and like vitally like a part of a team, and like not like the team or like the leader of the team, like they're part of it, is that they are in real relationship with brothers and sisters in Christ, like working towards God's kingdom. And like God's essentially, Jesus is, the captain of the team. We're all just playing on it. And I think that when I feel most healthy, that is kind of the feeling that I have. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. That's just, and it also feels like very, very me-centric. So I'm curious what other people think about that.
No, that was perfect. Yeah, you touched on a lot of different points, and yeah, I think that was exactly what I was looking for. Courtney, would you also like to give your experience of how you think the Enneagram could be used to glorify God, serve others, connect to a church community, any of the above?
Sure. Yeah, I think, and I alluded to this a little bit, I think last week, but I think it was probably end of 2018, beginning of 2019, when I really started to get very familiar with the Enneagram and the 3, and kind of dig into a little bit more of maybe the unhealthy parts of me, and kind of what God wanted to say to that. And there were a couple of things that I feel like were very meaningful to me at the time of kind of real first discovery. And part of it is your work does not define your worth. I think that was something that kind of over and over, I felt like, okay, that God was just continuing to draw me to that, I was not defined by what I did or, what I produced. I was defined by him and, as a daughter of the King. And then the other thing too was just this idea of like, just be with me. Kind of a little bit to like what Sarah was alluding to with Sabbath earlier. I feel like there is usually this, okay, I have to be doing something. I have to be achieving something or crossing something off a list, or there's always like a million tabs open in my brain of things that need to be done. And just prioritizing time to just be and sit and be with God, I think was I began to recognize how challenging it was for me, honestly, but also how vitally important it was for me to prioritize that and continue to work on that. And that I didn't have to always be producing or doing something to earn value in other people's eyes or in God's eyes. So I think that was something that initially God was really kind of drawing out of me. And then I think in terms of other ways to serve others, and Sean, I love what you said about thinking about Jesus as the captain of the team. It's like when I feel like I'm in a very healthy 3 state, I'm a a good vital contributor of the team. And I think sometimes for me as a 3, I want to be in control, or I want to be in charge, or, I want things done my way. And so I think that I've recognized more when I'm in a healthy state, that I'm willing to give up that control, and I want Jesus to be the captain. I want him to be the captain of the team, the ship, whatever we're doing, whether, and even that's in a church setting, like really, really giving him, okay, God, this is yours. I'm so honored to be a part of it, but I do not need to be the part of it. So kind of letting go of all of that too.
I really like that both you and Sean mentioned how the Enneagram is kind of like this thermometer of your actions and the way that you're thinking, and it allows you to kind of sense like where you are in proximity to God, so that if you are in an unhealthy state, it kind of like snaps you out and be like, okay, this is how I need to get back to God. This is how I need to be a team player. And it's cool to see that parallel in both your stories. Sarah, if we could also get your input.
Yeah, so I think that something that really struck me was, so I actually chose to go through some counseling in 2018, 2019, partly initiated because of my parents were separating and ending their marriage, and that was very traumatic for me. And so I started entering into like counseling and Christian counseling, and then I realized, well, there's actually other things to work on beyond just that issue. And I remember during one session, my therapist saying something to me like, but can you even conceive of the idea that like you could do nothing else, if you didn't do anything else in your life and you just were, that God would still love every hair on your head? And I just like, I was so dumbfounded by it, because I realized that like I had not been living that way at all, and that that so many of my achievements were not things that were obviously things that God did not care about as much, and they were parts of my identity that will ultimately be stripped away beyond this life, right? Those won't be parts of my identity that will be very important. So what are the parts of my identity that are most important? And I think it caused me to want to spend a lot more time internally focused, just spending a lot more time in silence and in prayer, and being much more inwardly focused, so that I could be a better listener to what God was saying and what's being experienced in our church and in our community, and not feeling the desire to have to act always. And that the Enneagram can be used in this case to bring people closer to God, in that sense of who is my authentic self, God? Like, help me uncover that and be that person. I want to be that person for you in whatever capacity you need me, because that's where I'll feel most whole and be the best servant of you. So I think the last few years have been a lot about uncovering that, and that can only really be done in a deep relationship with God, not really through other, there's no shortcuts to it. There's no sort of like tips or tricks. So it's a very hard thing for 3s to unwire. The desire to do is actually counterproductive to that relationship in some ways. But I think that I've really loved enjoying learning about the other members of our community too, and their Enneagram types, because it's allowed me to focus in on how can I better interact with the other types. Like, how do I better, I work really well with 1s and kind of get along with 8s, but I've been learning more and more about how to work with 4s and 9s and all the types, so I feel like I really have a great appreciation for other people's personalities in a deeper way as well, learning more about them.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things about the Enneagram as well, just learning about all the different types. And I work well with 3s as well. So being a 1 to 3, I totally get that. It's such a wonderful community builder. And there's so many times where I'm able to walk up to someone that maybe I don't know and be like, hey, do you know your Enneagram? And then right off the bat, it's kind of like an easy connection and a way to bring people together, even though, like I said, it's not the end all be all of personality types, but it's a great conversation starter and a way to build a bridge. So I love that. I love that you shared that. Also, I really liked what you said about just like being enough for God, like even if you didn't do another thing the rest of your life, just being so loved by God despite that. And that kind of brings us into our closing scripture reading that I will read for us. It comes from Luke 3, 21 and 22. That is the baptism of Jesus. And it says, when all the people were being baptized, Jesus was baptized too. And as he was praying, heaven was opened, and the Holy Spirit descended on him in bodily form like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." And I was talking to Ian earlier today, and he thought this passage would be perfect for the Enneagram 3 session because it really illuminates how Jesus was so loved and pleased God so much, yet he had not even begun his ministry. He had not done a single thing yet, basically, yet he was so loved by God. And what a great illustration of how God looks at us as well, that we're not people that can gain God's love through works or achievements, but we are just loved by God all the same. And as we close here today, I would love to open the floor for any final thoughts or comments or reflections as well. If anyone would love to share.
I'll share a little bit. I love that passage and that scripture when it says, with you I am well pleased. Kind of while Sean and Sarah were talking, I was thinking back to it was a couple of years ago, and it was again kind of through this whole discovery process for me, really. And I remember getting we do, reviews at work, and we actually do one that's called an upward feedback survey. And this review is done with it's done with your peers. It's done with people that report to you. And for me, I actually did it with some people, like my husband. Actually, Sarah participated in it as well. So it was a pretty conclusive review. And I remember when I was given it to me, one of the comments that was said, it was, I feel like your armor is cracked. And it was like such a profound statement for me, because it was like this, like I had tried to like have this illusion of like having it all together. And obviously I didn't. And everyone knew that. But it was like when it was like told to me, like this is how people perceive you, it was just like, oh, I felt like my armor, it was cracked, and I feel like I was exposed. And I remember like that was such like a vivid, something that I could vividly remember. And I just remember after that, like, wow, these people know me and they see me and they still love me. Like they still want to be with me. They still are rooting for me. They still like enjoy working with me and being friends with me, and like still want me to, achieve everything that I want to achieve. Yet they see all of my cracks and flaws. And I just think so much more how much God sees those things in us, yet still loves us too. And just how much he's continues saying, like, whatever you do, like, even if you, as Sarah mentioned, even if you do nothing for the rest of your life, like with you, I am well pleased.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I agree. I love that illustration as well. Sarah, did you want to say something? I saw your mic.
Well, I think Courtney summarized it so well. I mean, I resonate very much with that sense of having the armor, and so it's I think a lot of the journey for a 3 is just experiencing life without the armor on. Like, what would that be like to be who I am, and to know myself, and to be loved regardless, and also to then be okay if some people don't love you in the way you hope. Like, there's this element of we don't always have to please everyone. We can't always please everyone. And I think I think about that a lot, entering into, for example, a new job, a new career right now, a new phase of my career, because to do it healthily, I don't want it to be about purely the achievement. It's the joy is in the journey. And so it's so much more about the relationships you're forming along the way and the real human connections you're making. So I think for me, that's exciting though now. I'm reconciled that there's so much joy to come from that. And it makes me think of, I believe this is from the Bible, scripture. I'm not sure where from, what chapter, but there's a phrase around, you should make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. And as a 3, I actually think of that quote often, because there's actually a lot of beauty in a quiet life. And to be so ambitious, the idea of what if I channeled all of this ambition into just leading a healthy, quiet life, there's so much beauty to be found there. So I think as a 3, like, to be happy with a phrase like that speaks to being in a healthy state in some way. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure where in the Bible that is either, but I've heard that before, and that's such a beautiful thing to strive for. Sean, did you have any final thoughts? Or are you good?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Sarah and Courtney have crushed this part, like true 3s. But I guess I'll say that when you're reading that verse, I was thinking of this scene in Good Will Hunting where Robin Williams is like, "It's not your fault, Will. It's not your fault, Will." And like that, I like the image of armor breaking and stuff. I think that's something that like I constantly personally need to be reminded of, and like that is an okay thing too. Like it's not bad to have your armor broken sometimes, especially by those who love you, and especially God. And so just welcoming that process, however painful it might be, because we'd love to hold on to our masks to the world. It's ultimately a good thing.
There we go. Yeah. I don't know if any of you have read any Brene Brown, but in her book, Dare to Lead, she talks a lot about like taking off the mask and being vulnerable in like workplaces and relationships. So that's exactly what I thought about when you were talking about that. But that leads us to the end of our session. I just want to thank all 3 of you for participating. I know that we've all kind of been in a death by Zoom state. So I really appreciate you taking on another hour of screens and being so vulnerable and opening up during this time. And I want to thank everyone from Ecclesia who is viewing this from home or work or wherever you're at, just being curious about the Enneagram and how it can be used to better your relationship with God, better your relationships with others, and become a better servant. So we will see you guys next week as we explore another number. We will see which number comes next. It'll be a surprise to us all. But once again, thank you all, and have a great evening. Grace and peace.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you, Danielle.
Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.